Okay, so where we left off, we said that we cannot take a square root of a negative number because 3 times 3 is going to give me a positive 9, and negative 3 times negative 3 is still going to give me a positive 9. And what we ended up saying was this was no solution because you cannot take a square root of a negative number. What I'm going to tell you today is there's actually a whole other set of number that represents square root of a negative number. And that is what we're doing on our notes for today. Okay, so not all quadratic equations have real number solutions. To describe these non-real number solutions, mathematicians created an expanded system of numbers using imaginary number. And we write the scripted I to describe imaginary number. This is how imaginary number is defined. The definition of an imaginary number, I, is equals to a square root of negative 1. So anytime you have a square root of negative 1, you know that's an imaginary number. And if you take a square of both sides, if you square both sides, you would have I squared equals to just negative 1, because the square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1 is equal to just negative 1. And we're going to need to use this later on when we start multiplying imaginary number. But for today, we're just going to look at simplifying a square root of a negative number for now. So let's take a look at the first one. Square root of negative 25. I would say, that's no solution because I cannot take a square root of a negative number. That was yesterday. Today, now we know about our imaginary number. What we're going to do is I'm going to split this up. I know that square root of negative 25 has 2 parts. I know that square root of 25, it's a real thing. Now, how do I get negative 25? 25 times negative 1 is negative 25. So I split up square root of negative 25 into square root of negative 1 times square root of 25. I know, according to my definition of imaginary number, square root of negative 1 is my imaginary number. So I'm going to write that as I. Times, I'm going to work out square root of 25. That's going to give me 5. An imaginary number follows a whole number, and it leads a square root, a radical. So in this case, I'm going to rewrite it as 5i. And I have just simplified square root of negative 25 to 5i, 5 times an imaginary number. Let's give the next one a try. Square root of negative 72. Again, I'm going to split it up into 2 square root, a negative 1 times a 72. I know that square root of negative 1 is I times square root of 72. I got to simplify that. Simplify square root of 72 to 36. So that's going to give me 6 square root of 2. Remember what I said? I follows a whole number and goes in front of a square root. So final answer, 6 times I times square root of 2. Final answer. One more example. Square root of negative 5 times square root of negative 9. Now, negative 5 times square root of negative 9. Negative 5 is just a regular number. It's just a negative 5. So it stays as a negative 5. Square root of negative 9, that's the one I'm going to split into 2. I'm going to split that into negative 1 and 9. So negative 5 stays as negative 5. Square root of negative 1 is an I. So negative 5 times I times square root of 9 is 3. So combining like term, negative 5 times 3 is going to give me negative 15I. Is my final simplified answer.